They'll never warn you, because if you did, you wouldn't fall for it. From an early age, they taught you that everyone deserves to be trusted, that just be good and good will come back to you. But Carl Jung had already made it clear, this is the illusion that opens the door to disaster. There are people who not only won't save you, but will drag you into their own darkness. And make no mistake, these aren't strangers on the street, they're close faces, familiar voices, people who present themselves as friends, mentors, partners, or even safe havens. They don the mask of virtue, speak of spirituality, and hide behind archetypes that seem trustworthy, but behind this persona, their ego works silently. What they want isn't your friendship, nor your evolution, but your energy, your strength, your brilliance. The problem is, by the time you realize it, you're already trapped. The silent manipulator has already ensnared you. The psychic vampire has drained your vitality. The false virtuoso has already planted guilt. And while you believe you're protected, your life is being guided by shadows you dare not see. Today, you'll discover who these 6 people are, how to recognize them, and why Jung warned that ignoring this warning can cost you much more than you imagine. The silent manipulator who never shows his true face. He's the one who doesn't need to raise his voice or pound on the table to get what he wants. The silent manipulator operates in the cracks of perception, camouflaged by subtle gestures, carefully chosen phrases, and glances that seem innocent but carry hidden intentions. Those who cross his path rarely realize immediately that they're in the presence of someone who constructs a calculated persona, a social mask that adapts to the occasion. Carl Jung warned about the dangers of confusing appearance with essence. Behind the calm face, the ego silently plots. It's in this space between what's shown and what's hidden that the risk lies. After all, how can we distrust someone who never seems to arouse suspicion? The power of this type of figure lies not in the scream, but in the silence that envelops and numbs them. They understand the archetypes people project, the trustworthy friend, the loyal colleague, the prudent advisor, and wear these images like tailored clothing. However, behind the scenes, they cultivate intentions that rarely align with spirituality or the shadow work necessary to face their own darkness. They prefer to manipulate the shadows of others rather than confront their own. It's the kind of presence that drains energy without the victim realizing it, always leaving a confused feeling, as if something is wrong, but impossible to name. Want a practical example? Imagine a coworker who never openly disagrees, but subtly steers decisions where he wants them. He doesn't confront, he just suggests. He doesn't accuse, he just insinuates. And, in the end, when the group realizes, the choice has already been shaped without resistance. How to escape this net? The first step is to develop awareness, that sharp eye that Carl Jung advocated, understanding what isn't said, observing the silences more than the words. A good exercise is to keep a diary of interactions, recording not only what was said, but also what was felt. It's there, between the lines, that the silent manipulator reveals his presence. And when this discovery happens, it soon becomes clear that the game of masquerades will deepen even further. The silent manipulator who never shows his true face. He doesn't need to raise his voice or pound on the table to exert dominance. The silent manipulator is like a ghost that inhabits the surface of relationships, always present, but never fully revealed. His strength lies not in overt aggression, but in the cold calculation of every gesture, every strategic pause. He builds a persona so well crafted that it appears harmless, almost angelic, but that's precisely where the danger lies. Carl Jung said that where there is a mask, there is also a shadow, and this type of figure specializes in using the ego as a shiny facade to conceal hidden intentions. He disguises himself as a wise counselor, a trusted friend, a supportive colleague, but every move is guided by something unspeakable. Spirituality here is nothing more than a veneer. He speaks of light, but acts in darkness. Have you ever noticed how some people seem too good to be true? Well, they almost always aren't. This type of manipulator feeds on what you don't see. They're masters at capturing your blind spots, exploiting your emotional and cognitive weaknesses. Unlike the overt aggressor, they don't leave visible marks. They leave doubts. Doubts about yourself, about how you feel, about whether you're exaggerating or imagining things. They're the emotional vampire who dons archetypes of trust, but harbors an arsenal of unspoken intentions. They don't disagree, they just suggest. They don't accuse, they just insinuate. They don't impose, they just help. But in the end, when you realize it, you're living within the script they wrote. And worse, thinking it was your choice. Carl Jung called this projection. You place virtues you long for, and they use this very naivete as fuel. It's a game of shadow and light that doesn't forgive the inattentive. And the more superficial spirituality someone displays, the more it's worth being suspicious. Some preach love and light as a facade to manipulate in the dark. Need an example? The co-worker who always seems supportive of your ideas, but who mysteriously ends up right where you want to be. The friend who never criticizes directly, but who plants small seeds of insecurity in your conversations until you begin to doubt yourself. The romantic partner who never gets angry, but who controls you through calculated passivity, through a lack of reaction, through a silence that weighs more than any word. This is the silent manipulator. They don't attack, they engage. They don't confront, they drain. They don't show, they hide. How can you escape this? The answer isn't simple, but it begins with shadow work, the courageous act of looking within and realizing why you allowed someone with such an impeccable persona so much access to your energy. And it's at this point that you discover the uncomfortable truth. The silent manipulator only exists because we insist on ignoring the signs that burn before our eyes. But if this first type already bothers you, wait until you see how the mask of virtue can hide even darker intentions. The mask of virtue that hides dark intentions. The most dangerous figure is not the outright criminal, nor the self-confessed enemy, but the one who cloaks themselves in virtue to camouflage their own darkness. The mask of virtue is one of the ego's most sophisticated weapons. It not only deceives others, but also convinces the wearer that they are morally untouchable. They repeat cliches about kindness, speak of spirituality as if it were synonymous with purity, and set themselves up as a role model. But one only needs to look closely to see the crack. Behind this brilliant persona lie hidden archetypes, vile intentions, and a repressed shadow clamoring for expression. Carl Jung once said that the more someone tries to appear holy, the more hidden the beast within. And the most perverse part? These virtuous people don't just seek to protect themselves. They use the appearance of virtue as a weapon to manipulate, control, and blame those who don't follow the same standard. Have you ever noticed how the greatest moral fraudsters are those who most often present themselves as role models? The politician who defends family values while destroying his own home. The spiritual leader who preaches detachment but collects obscure riches. The colleague who poses as just and generous but silently backstabs anyone who threatens his position. The mask of virtue serves as a shield against suspicion, because who would dare question someone who seems so kind? Society, in its naivete, still values the appearance of virtue more than the naked truth of human nature. This is the stage where the moral manipulator flourishes. He knows that repeating pretty words is enough to numb consciences. And while everyone applauds, he acts in the shadows. Make no mistake, when kindness is paraded as propaganda, it almost always serves to cover up the opposite. Want to know how to spot this trap? Observe the coherence, not the words. Those who truly practice spirituality don't need to advertise it. Those who truly carry light don't need to shout it on every street corner. The true one doesn't promote himself, he simply is. If someone constantly needs to reinforce his image of being just, good, and pure, it's because he fears that the shadow will slip through the cracks. A practical exercise is to be wary of those who always place themselves above criticism. True humility accepts confrontation, but masked virtue reacts with anger or victimhood. The irony is that these characters end up being the most dangerous because they control through moralism, transforming guilt into a weapon. And when guilt sets in, the dominated become a servant, believing they owe penance to the virtuous. But this farce at some point implodes, and when it does, the next character emerges. The bearer of the repressed shadow, the one who explodes without warning and leaves devastating trails. The bearer of the repressed shadow that explodes without warning, they can spend years cultivating an image of balance, serenity, and self-control. Outsiders think, this person never loses their cool. Uday, but what no one sees is the subterranean volcano, fueled by every swallowed anger, every stifled desire, every impulse buried in the unconscious. Carl Jung said that everything that isn't integrated sooner or later returns with violence. And the bearer of the repressed shadow is precisely this being, seemingly docile, yet ready to explode in ways no one expects. They are the emotional time bomb that smiles silently, but at the slightest trigger, transforms a dinner party into a battlefield, a relationship into ruin, a friendship into a psychological massacre. Superficial spirituality tries to smother the shadow with mantras of peace and love, but the truth is brutal. There is no peace without inner confrontation. These outbursts aren't random, they're psyche-wide reckonings. Have you ever noticed how some individuals hold a grudge for years, without saying anything until a minor detail makes them lose control completely? They're not reacting to the present, they're unearthing ghosts from the past. That boss who seemed patient, but one day breaks the table in the middle of the office. The partner who seemed understanding, but suddenly lashes out with cruel words. The friend who was always helpful, but who, in a trivial argument, reveals a murderous rage. This is shadow work undone. Repressing the shadow doesn't eliminate the darkness, it only keeps it incubating, growing in silence. When the explosion happens, it's devastating because it carries not only the anger of the moment, but years of accumulated frustration. And here's the controversial point. The problem isn't the outburst itself, but the fact that the person never had the courage to face their shadow before. If they had, they would have recognized the archetypes that dominate them and worked on them consciously. But because they preferred to maintain the persona of the good guy or the calm woman, they ended up becoming hostage to something much bigger. Want to avoid becoming like this? Practice daily awareness exercises. Write down your frustrations. Say out loud what you've never dared admit. Face your darkest thoughts without judgment. Better an authentic scream today than an uncontrollable rage tomorrow. Because those who repress too much one day become dangerous not only to others, but to themselves. And when the shadow finds an opening, it becomes a spectacle of destruction that no one can control. But if this is already devastating, imagine the next, the moral controller, the one who doesn't explode, but prefers to use guilt as an invisible weapon. The moral controller who uses guilt as a weapon. Among all the dark archetypes, perhaps the most cunning is the moral controller. He doesn't need to shout, he doesn't need to physically punish, he doesn't need to raise his hand, because he's discovered there's a whip more effective than any blow: guilt. This character dons the mask of moral authority, positions himself as an example, and from there begins to dictate what is right and wrong, as if he were the owner of a universal truth. Carl Jung said that the ego loves to hide behind virtues, and here we see this in its most corrosive form. The moral controller positions himself as an invisible judge, transforming every mistake into sin, every choice into deviation, every desire into weakness. And the cruelest thing is that he never places himself in a position of failure. Only others make mistakes. Only others need to redeem themselves. This mechanism is as old as the religions that exploited fear to control entire populations. Priests and pastors who preach salvation, but first need to convince you that you are an incurable sinner. Politicians who talk about ethics, but who thrive on the corruption they publicly condemn. Parents who claim to be loving, but who reduce their children to emotional puppets, using phrases like, "I did everything for you, and this is how you repay me." This invisible weapon, guilt, is so powerful because it is not accompanied by external chains, but creates internal prisons. The guilty person becomes their own jailer. They apologize without having done wrong, obey without wanting to, and self-efface without realizing it. This is the triumph of the moral controller. It is not they who need to monitor, it is the victim who monitors themselves. Want a practical example to help you understand when you're under this spell? Observe whether your choices stem from desire or fear. If you're doing something simply to avoid being judged, criticized, or abandoned, you've already fallen into its web. The shadow work here is brutal. You need to face the fact that the guilt you carry is often not even yours, but planted by those who benefit from your imprisonment. Write on a piece of paper, "What would I do if I didn't fear anyone's disapproval?" The answers will shock you because they show how much of your life is lived not by you, but by the ego of others. The moral controller wins when you believe freedom is a sin. And it is in this devastated terrain that the next dark archetype flourishes. The psychic vampire, the one who doesn't need to blame because he prefers to silently suck every last drop of your life energy. The psychic vampire who drains your energy in silence. The psychic vampire doesn't appear in horror movies with sharp fangs or dark capes. He disguises himself as a friend, a partner, a co-worker. He doesn't ask for permission. He approaches, smiles, listens, engages, and slowly begins to drain. Anyone who has spent hours with one of these people knows the feeling. They start the conversation full of energy and end it exhausted, as if they've run an emotional marathon. Carl Jung said that psychic energy is humankind's most precious asset. And precisely for this reason, this type of figure learned to feed on the vitality of others. It's not just a matter of fatigue, it's soul theft, a silent drain. Popular spirituality speaks of negative energy, but here we're not talking about magic or superstition, but rather about real psychological dynamics. A hungry ego that feeds on your attention, your guilt, your compassion. This vampire never arrives announcing intentions because its strength lies in silence. It knows how to trigger your inner archetypes to keep you trapped. Sometimes it plays the victim, sometimes the counselor, sometimes the eternally needy. It could be the friend who calls every day just to spill their guts but never asks how you are. It could be the relative who constantly complains about life but refuses to change anything. It could even be that colleague who always asks for a little favor and turns you into a casual employee. The drain isn't in the request itself, but in the frequency and lack of reciprocity. It doesn't want exchange, it wants consumption. It's like sitting next to someone who lights a cigarette and constantly blows smoke in your direction. You didn't ask for it, but you end up breathing it, intoxicated. Want to defend yourself from this invisible theft? First, recognize the pattern. Observe how you feel after encountering certain people. If you leave worse than when you entered, something is wrong. Shadow work in this case is asking yourself why you allow yourself to be sucked in. Fear of appearing selfish, a desire to be accepted, attachment to the nice guy persona. Start setting clear boundaries. Say no without explaining yourself. Walk away without feeling guilty. And above all, don't let yourself get caught up in the emotional game. A practical exercise is to set aside time for silence after each draining interaction. to realize what remains and what doesn't belong to you. This way, you avoid carrying psychic waste that isn't yours. But be careful. If the vampire acts in silence, the next one is even more treacherous, the master of illusion, the one who doesn't drain your energy but creates false realities with subtle lies. The master of illusion who lives on subtle lies. This is perhaps the most dangerous of all because it doesn't just steal your energy, it steals your perception of reality. The master of illusion doesn't need to invent grand stories to deceive. He simply distorts details, sows doubts, and repeats half-truths until they become complete truths in your mind. He builds castles of smoke where each lie is supported by another, and in the end, you no longer know what is real and what is fabricated. Carl Jung said that the human psyche is vulnerable because it projects, and this is what the illusionist exploits. He disguises himself as a sage, a spiritual guide, a close friend, and gradually convinces you that he sees what you don't. Spirituality in this context becomes a stage for manipulation, mantras used as hypnosis, sweet words used as anesthesia. And those who fall into this net discover too late that they are trapped in a theater where every scene has been carefully scripted to serve the manipulator's ego. These subtle lies don't come as blows, but as whispers. The partner who says, "No one will love you like I do." The boss who blurts out, "Without me, you wouldn't have gotten this far." The spiritual guru who promises quick enlightenment as long as you blindly trust his instructions. The strength of this archetype lies in the detail, in the suggestion, in the manipulation of the invisible. It's not the blatant lie that destroys, but the drop that slowly corrodes the stone. You start believing in small distortions, and before you know it, you're already living within a narrative you didn't write. This is the true theft, not of your energy, but of your story. The master of illusion hijacks your identity and makes you defend prison as if it were freedom. Want to shield yourself from this spell? Always question, even those you love, even those who seem wise. Carl Jung taught that individuation requires separating projection from reality. Ask, is this voice mine or someone I've placed within me? A simple exercise. Write down 3 sentences you believe about yourself and ask yourself where they came from. You'll be shocked to realize that many were planted by others. This is the key. Not to fight the lie, but to build your own truth, solid, conscious, non-negotiable, because the master of illusion only survives where there is no clarity. And when this clarity emerges, you also see the next character, the envious friend, the one who smiles on the outside but secretly wishes for your downfall. The envious friend who secretly wishes you downfall. Few enemies are as dangerous as the one you call a friend. The envious friend is the most treacherous because they don't stay outside your circle of trust. They infiltrate it. They applaud your achievements in public, but deep down, each victory feels like a personal defeat. Carl Jung said that what we repress in others is often a reflection of what we can't stand in ourselves. This is why the envious person always desires your downfall. Your light reminds them of their own shadow. Your courage exposes their cowardice. Their evolution reveals the abyss in which they insist on remaining. This is the falsest archetype of friendship because their smile is a mask, their presence is a persona, and their energy is poison. Have you ever noticed how certain friends seem always there when you're down, but disappear when you get better? They appear in chaos, but disappear in victory. It's the one who offers a shoulder to cry on, but can't celebrate your success. It's the colleague who says, "I'm happy for you," while their look betrays frustration. It's the teammate who pretends to celebrate the promotion they wanted for themselves. The envious friend won't attack you directly, at least not right away. They prefer the subtle game, a joke disguised as irony, a piece of advice that seems well-intentioned but sows insecurity, a friendly criticism that undermines your confidence. Little by little, you find yourself questioning your own victories. This is their triumph, making you doubt what you've already achieved. Want to neutralize this shadow in others? First, learn to listen to the silence. Those who don't resonate with you when they should are already shouting the truth of their own envy. Then practice detachment. Don't carry people who don't know how to celebrate your light. Spirituality doesn't require you to keep everyone close. It requires discernment. Shadow work isn't just about your shadow, but also about recognizing the shadows that infiltrate your life. A simple exercise: make a list of 5 people who genuinely rejoice in your victories. If it's difficult to complete, you already have your answer. It's not cruel to cut ties with envious people, it's self-preservation. Because the envious friend may smile today, but deep down, they want to see the stage collapse. And it's precisely this emotional fragility that paves the way for the next archetype, the seducer of power, the one who uses charm not to silently knock you down, but to trap you in a brilliant trap. The seducer of power who uses charm as a trap. He doesn't need to force, he doesn't need to shout, he doesn't need to threaten. The seducer of power understands that the most effective way to captivate someone is not through violence, but through fascination. He uses charm like an invisible web, looks that hypnotize, words that sound like music, calculated gestures that give the impression of closeness. But behind this charming persona, what lies is not genuine affection, but manipulation. Carl Jung said that the ego loves to wear convincing masks, and this archetype masters the art of appearing trustworthy while leading you into a labyrinth with no exit. The spirituality here is distorted. He presents himself as someone enlightened, seductive, possessing an almost divine charisma, but it's all just a strategy to gain power over you. This type of figure doesn't seek connection, it seeks control. They offer attention, affection, even opportunities, but all with an invisible currency embedded. They're the boss who promises professional advancement in exchange for blind loyalty. They're the romantic partner who ensnares you in a sweeping romance, only to later reveal the emotional prison they've built around themselves. They're the spiritual leader who uses soft words and performative embraces, but whose true goal is to capture followers, not liberate souls. The seducer of power understands that many confuse intensity with love, charisma with truth, magnetism with spirituality, and it's precisely in this confusion that they triumph. When you believe you're being chosen, when in fact you're being hunted. How to escape this spell? First, recognize that charm isn't synonymous with character. If someone seems too good to be true, they almost always are. Shadow work, in this case, requires confronting your own neediness. Why do you so desperately need the approval and attention of someone charismatic? The seducer only has power over those who hunger for validation. A practical exercise. Before falling for someone, ask yourself if that person delivers consistency or just intensity. Consistency builds, intensity manipulates. Carl Jung reminded us that archetypes live within us, and so we need to be vigilant when faced with someone who knows how to trigger ours. And when seduction loses its effect, many assume another, even more poisonous disguise: the eternal victim. The one who neither charms nor fascinates, but who enslaves through pity and the emotional burden they place on their shoulders. The eternal victim who enslaves through punishment. Among all the shadow archetypes, this is perhaps the most underestimated because it doesn't present itself as dangerous, but as fragile. The eternal victim is the one who has learned to transform their own pain into power capital. They don't threaten, they don't seduce, they don't scream, they just cry. But this crying is strategic, repetitive, calculated. Carl Jung said that the shadow can take subtle forms, and here it cloaks itself in impotence. The eternal victim never takes responsibility, always outsources blame, always finds a story to justify their failure. Spirituality in this case becomes an excuse. The universe doesn't help me. My karma is heavy. No one understands my pain. But behind the apparent fragility lies a hungry ego that has found in the pity of others the most comfortable way to enslave those who come near. This archetype is dangerous because it hijacks your compassion. It knows you're human, that you have empathy, and precisely because of that, it turns you into a hostage. You start by helping willingly, but soon realize the help is never enough. The victim always needs more attention, more money, more time, more care, and ironically, they reject any real solution because it would undermine the role that sustains their persona. Examples abound. The friend who always asks for a loan but never tries to find a job. The relative who spends their life complaining about illness but refuses treatment. The colleague who is always overwhelmed but never gets organized. They all have something in common: victimization as a manipulation strategy. They don't want a cure. They want emotional servants. Do you want to break this chain? Recognize that pity is not love. Shadow work here is confronting your own need to save others. Ask yourself, am I helping because I want to, or because I've been manipulated by guilt? A practical exercise. When someone comes up with the victim line, offer a concrete solution and observe their reaction. If they reject it, it's because they don't want a way out. They want to remain in the role that grants them power. Carl Jung said that no one becomes whole by escaping the shadow, and the eternal victim is proof of this. They prefer to live imprisoned by their own narrative rather than face their responsibility. And if this type already seems suffocating, wait until you meet the last on the list, the cold strategist, the one who uses no charm, pity, or masks, but who sees everyone as disposable pieces in a power game. The cold strategist who sees everyone as pieces in his game. This character doesn't get lost in drama, doesn't hide behind tears, doesn't wear himself out with emotional outbursts. He's learned the lesson many fear to admit. For those who only seek power, people are nothing more than pieces on a board. The cold strategist is the embodiment of the ego that knows no limits, that doesn't mind using archetypes, personas, and even fragments of spirituality as tools of manipulation. He doesn't seduce, he doesn't cry, he doesn't shout, he just calculates. Carl Jung said the unconscious is a vast force field, but this type of figure has learned to observe human weaknesses like one observes flaws in a system. For him, feelings are control variables, emotions are bargaining chips, bonds are temporary contracts. He doesn't play with you, he plays on you. You've probably encountered people like this in leadership positions, in politics, in the financial market, or even within your own family. They don't demonstrate affection, but they know how to imitate the language of empathy when necessary. They don't believe in loyalty, but they speak of unity when it guarantees followers. They trust no one, but they make calculated promises like casino chips. The cold strategist doesn't need to be loved or feared, he just needs to be obeyed. And obedience comes not through brute force, but through the manipulation of one's innermost desires and fears. He sees envy, neediness, and the need for approval and, like a chess player, moves the pieces until each person is exactly where he wants them. How to protect yourself from this archetype? First, recognize that you can be a target too. The biggest mistake is to think you're immune. Shadow work requires a radical examination. Which part of me sells itself cheap? That's where the strategist comes in, buying your vanity with compliments, your insecurity with promises, your ambition with shortcuts. Want a practical exercise? When someone offers you something great with minimal effort, be suspicious. When someone seems too good to be true, question it. The cold strategist survives because many prefer a comfortable illusion to harsh reality. Carl Jung said that those who don't know their own shadow will always be manipulated by the shadow of others, and this archetype is the shadow incarnate in calculation. But if this is the last on the list, It's also the most revealing, because it reveals, without masks, the game everyone else tries to hide. And it's at this point that you understand why Jung warned that certain people, if left unchecked, can simply destroy your life. Now you've seen what no one dares talk about openly. These people are closer than you think, and if you don't learn to recognize them, sooner or later you'll be sucked into their game. Carl Jung said that the shadow you don't see controls your life behind your back. The question is, how many of these 6 people are already around you? Are you already trapped by the silent manipulator, believing you have a faithful friend? Has the mask of virtue made you feel guilty for being who you are? Or are you exhausted because, without realizing it, a psychic vampire feeds on your energy every day? The answer isn't out there. It lies in the courage to look clearly at your relationships and take responsibility for your own soul. So I ask you, who do you need to cut out of your life right now? Who do you need to confront without fear? And above all, who will you decide to never let have power over you again? Write in the comments, because sometimes admitting it is the first step to breaking the chain. And if you want to continue opening your eyes to truths no one has the courage to tell, subscribe to the channel now, turn on notifications and come with me, because the next cut could be exactly what you need to save your life.